Hello, Cheyenne. I'm going to be responding to your paper one about the history of architecture. Okay. Imagine walking down the sidewalk of a city and looking up at the massive buildings lying down the road. At one point in time, each of those buildings were only thoughts on paper designed by no other than architects. Oh, I was loving it! And then I feel like it got a little weird right there. Okay, architects take on the role of architecture, which is the art of designing and constructing buildings. However, architecture hasn't always been what it is today. In fact, its ideologies and basic pursuits have changed over the decades and continue to do so today. In brief, this essay will touch on the history of architecture, symbolic builds, and its overall evolution. Beautiful! There was only that one little stumble there. Let's see, where was it? Each of those buildings were only thoughts on paper. I would say, period, there. That last little part. Yeah, I don't think you need it. And yeah, it's a lovely introduction. Well done. Like many things, architecture had to start somewhere. Around 10,000 BC, architecture took its first structure during the Neolithic times. Unlike today, architecture wasn't used in the use of, it wasn't used in the use? You can fix that. Used in the use of eco-friendly factors or aesthetic appeals, but for its ability to make life easier. These structures are commonly known as simple mud huts, in which people predominantly used in order to live in? Let's see. Simple mud huts. I would just stop it at mud huts, period. I mean, we know that they lived in them. Over time, these builds became more complex in terms of design and use. All right, so maybe you could say, no, these structures were, okay, so, sorry, let me take this apart a little bit. This lesson for you is the omit needless words. Every word you can cut out of your sentence, cut it. Is that hard on your word count? Sometimes, but it's often really good for the clarity of your writing. And it's often a thing that I talk with people about at this point in their education, in their undergrad time, because a lot of times people have spent like all the way up through 12th grade like learning how to write long, complex sentences that are grammatically standard, which you obviously can do. And often I come in at this moment and I say, okay, I know you can write those super long sentences, but it makes it easier to read, generally speaking, and it's just our style right now, like fashion wise in writing. It's our style to have both long and short sentences to kind of switch it up. Okay, so backing up. Okay. Architecture took its first structure during Neolithic times. I'm going to read through and just try to read the words that you absolutely have to have. Let's see here. Okay. Eco-friendly factors and aesthetic appeals were not important. Neolithic people just wanted to make life easier. That's not fewer words. Okay, sorry, back up. All right, you can say something about eco-friendly factors and aesthetic appeal. These simple mud huts over time became more complex in terms of design and use. Ah, there we go. I was doing some like F- teaching, but now I'm teaching at an A+ level. Okay, so that's really a good place to look at it. Simple mud huts. Okay. Those make life easier. I'm not gonna say it again. You can rewind it. Okay, but much clearer with fewer words. A lot of which was made in service to religious beliefs, such as those of the Romans. Most builds preserved today are those of developed and powerful cultures. Taking a closer look at these structures, it's easy to see the history each society expressed in their design and cultures they cultivated. All of this is done simply in the design of a building. Okay. Going back to the Romans. So we were talking about Neolithic people, and then you mentioned the Romans, and then you talk about most of the things we have today are from developed and powerful cultures. I think it makes more sense to have the Romans after that, because okay, Neolithic stuff, yeah, that's gone because it wasn't. It was made out of mud, so it's long gone for the most part. But then you could move to okay, most of the stuff we have left is from developed and powerful cultures, and then the Romans are one of our earlier examples of that. Of course, we have ancient Egyptian stuff. I mean, you know. Okay. If it wasn't for architecture, little would be known to this day about the people of the past. I like that point. One of the most commonly known preserved architectural structures is the infamous pyramids of Egyptian times. The first pyramid that comes to mind is probably the three pyramids of Giza. However, it took I don't know if it's Giza or Giza, maybe you know. However, it took 3 dynasties, approximately 2,700 years per dynasty, in order for the pyramids to obtain the commonly known smooth sides they have. During the first 3 dynasties, the Egyptians used a step-based design that followed a more block-like structure versus a smoother look. I used to read books on this when I was in many years ago, so I love reading about it again. One example of this is Zos, whatever his name is, pyramid built during the 3rd dynasty and was designed by one of the first known architects, Imhotep. I remember his name. These temples were built in order to preserve the bodies of pharaohs who ruled the land there. Okay, so this paragraph has been about, I love that idea about little would be known about them without architecture, but then you move to talking about how things changed, and you don't tell us what we know about Egyptians from the pyramids. So if this paragraph, I think it'd be great to add in, okay, what do we learn about that? The fact that they have, with the time they have and the relatively short lifespans they had back then too, like they decided to spend their time building giant pyramids. What does that tell us about them? Just that's the piece you need there. You almost got there. Okay, like the Egyptians, the Romans had their fair share in build design too. Most of the builds in ancient Greece were based around the people who lived there and creating public spaces. Extra words? I mean, everything you build is built around the people who live there and public spaces, right? One of the most captivating and popular build designs the Romans introduced was the arch. Are we talking about Greeks or are we talking about Romans? The arch became a staple in common designs of their buildings and was used in many famous structures. A couple of examples include the Roman Colosseum, Pont du Gard, I took French, fancy, and Arch of Septimius Severus. The Romans also introduced concrete. Concrete to this day is a popular building material in architecture and is commonly used for many build designs. The Romans use it for a majority of their designs, which include parts of the Pantheon, aqueducts, triumphal gates, and many more structures. The Romans' take on architecture influenced and revolutionized the history of architecture, and this is seen in future societies. Okay. So you mentioned the Greeks, but like you didn't talk about them really at all. So I think I would just take them out. And I feel like it makes sense to me that a view of architecture like from this far back, looking at the big picture, would leave the Greeks out as well, because the Romans are definitely more famous for the building techniques they came up with than the Greeks, although they ripped the Greeks off. I'm not going to talk about it now. Okay. And I love how the architecture influenced, and then this next paragraph, the influence is clearly portrayed and executed in the Byzantine era. During this time, the major contribution they gave, I guess you mean the Byzantines, was the creation of the dome. They were able to figure out how to create a structurally sound and secure dome by using something. A pendentive is a curved vault that is supported by columns with arches. This allows for the dome to sit up on top and almost seem as if it's floating. Without the Romans' development of the arch, the further development of the dome would not have succeeded. Eventually, this style of architecture was adopted by Islamic traders, maybe? The style of architecture was adopted by, yeah, it must be, I think you mean traders. For in the 15th century, the Turks defeated and conquered the Byzantine territories, making it widely known as the architecture of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, I think I see what you're saying there. As time progressed, architecture took a huge turn during the Middle Ages. During this time period, around 1200 to 1500 AD, architecture adopted its newest form, commonly called the Gothic era. This form of architecture was built to be light and airy, allowing for massive amounts of light to enter the structure. They were commonly built in perpendicular manner. In a perpendicular manner? Like, how else would you build something? With right angles? That may make sense, and it just may not make sense to me. Most of the structures had flying buttresses and a multitude of towers, which created a castle-like feel. This era also introduced gargoyles, which was a popular decorative item used to dress up the builds. The main motive of this style of build was its use for religious purposes. Originating in Europe, the people of the time wanted to find a way to further spread Christianity. Unlike the building style of the Romans, their solution was to create large structures that easily allowed for big gatherings. Their final design was eventually being heavily influenced by the Byzantines, thus creating cathedrals. Okay. I love how you're citing your sources as you need to through here. That when you say unlike the building style of the Romans, I think because you didn't mention in your paragraph about the Romans that they did something, that they did small spaces, or I don't know, that they didn't build large structures that allowed for big gatherings, that's confusing. So I think either let us know what you're going to compare it to, or maybe leave it out. Their final design eventually being heavily influenced by the Byzantines. That sentence confuses me. Their final design was heavily influenced by the Byzantine. Who's they? It seems like it could be the Romans or people in the Middle Ages. And you said they're influenced by the Byzantine, but I don't know what the Byzantine is other than domes. Okay. Though different regions of the world took on architecture in their own unique way, one thing remains consistent in their purpose, that being religion. Egyptians, Romans, and Europeans all designed structures that catered to and fulfilled their religious purposes. Okay, yes, I remember we had some talk about, or some back and forth about making this connection. Egyptians, Romans, and Europeans all designed structures that catered to and fulfilled their religious purposes. For example, the Romans built the Pantheon within the city for easy access to the people. I have been to the Pantheon, and that is amazing. It was a church in which civilians could go and worship. The Egyptians built massive temples and pyramids in order to store bodies. They did this because they believed in reincarnation, and in order to live again, they had preserved the dead. Well, I mean, like, kind of reincarnation, but... lastly, like mentioned above, the Europeans believed strongly in spreading the word of Christ by creating large churches. The Europeans believed they could achieve this. Overall, architecture has a history as long as humanity itself. Slowly over the years, its development grew and changed the way people live and continues to do so today. Slowly over the years, its development grew and changed the way people live, and it continues. Okay. I was kind of thrown off by, you said grew and changed and then continues. I don't know why that threw me off. It created a new profound design and support systems that allowed for new structures to be created and adopted by others. What started out as a means of protection soon turned a way of expressing religion and focusing on social gatherings rather than a place to sleep. I love that idea, but you didn't say that. Like, you talked about it, and sometimes this happens when you're writing. This happens to me plenty of the time when I'm writing, that like when I get to the conclusion, I actually figure out like, oh, this is what I wanted to say. And then I have to go back and like kind of make those connections earlier in what I wrote. And that could help you here. Sorry, we see this in the Roman Colosseum, a place built for celebration and entertainment. Generally it's a truly captivating idea. I think skyscrapers all began as simple drawings of paper, and it all started out as a mud hut built until 1000 BC. Yes. So like the narrative elements of your paper, I'm running out of time, are strong, and they really bring the reader in. That's a real strength of your writing. What you need to work on in your revision is taking out words you don't need. And you have over onto 4 pages. So like, and it's okay if your revision is a little too short, because I want you to work on like taking out words you don't need. And the other thing is going through and making sure, okay, if in the conclusion you're going to say, I've taught you this, this, and this. I've taught you that it was a place to live, and then it got bigger, and then this and this, that's actually what it says in your paper. That sounds silly, but it's not easy to do, actually, or we wouldn't have classes in writing. So I hope that's helpful.